Greetings, seeker of hidden truths. Fear has ruled humanity for centuries, shaping our choices, chaining our minds, and disguising itself as caution or reason. But what if I told you that fear ends, not by fighting it, but by surrendering to something far greater? If you're ready to dissolve the illusions of the ego and embrace a deeper freedom, stay with me. And before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because together, we're going to uncover what most people spend a lifetime avoiding. The end of fear begins where the ego starts to crumble. Alan Watts once said that the ego is simply an illusion, a social convention, a mask we wear. Yet most of us cling to that mask as if it were our true skin. Imagine a man drowning in a river, thrashing against the current, wasting every ounce of his energy to resist. The water is not the enemy. It's the man's refusal to let go that kills him. Fear works the same way. It isn't the situation itself that destroys us. It's our desperate resistance to it. Science has shown us that the amygdala, that almond-shaped part of the brain, is responsible for triggering fear responses. But here's the paradox. The brain reacts less intensely when we stop trying to suppress fear and instead allow it to be present. Surrender rewires the mind. It is not passivity, but power. The kind of power that makes soldiers walk calmly through chaos, or monks sit in silence while storms rage outside. Think of your ego as a strict puppeteer, pulling the strings, whispering, "You must control everything or else." And yet the tighter you grip, the more life slips through your fingers. What Watts teaches us is that surrender doesn't mean defeat. It means liberation. It means realizing you were never in control in the first place, and that freedom lies in flowing with reality, not against it. Picture a child building a sandcastle by the shore. With devotion, they sculpt towers and walls, but as the tide rises, the waves erase their masterpiece. The child laughs, rebuilds, and laughs again. Why? Because they have not yet built an ego that screams, "This castle is mine. It must last forever." Adults, however, mourn every collapse of relationships, of careers, of identities, because the ego convinces us that we are those castles. Fear is born in that illusion, the terror of losing what was never truly ours. This is where surrender becomes a radical act. Surrender is not resignation. It is the art of meeting the wave without panic, of saying yes to the impermanence that defines everything. Psychology calls this acceptance. Buddhism calls it non-attachment, and neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity in action, the brain adapting to change instead of resisting it. Watts simply called it wisdom. Consider for a moment how many of your fears are ghosts of the future. The fear of failure before you've even tried, the fear of rejection before you've even spoken, the fear of death while you are still alive. The ego feeds on these phantoms, building prisons out of shadows. But when you surrender, when you stop bargaining with the unknown, something remarkable happens. The shadows dissolve, and what remains is a clear, steady awareness. It is in this awareness that fear loses its grip. It cannot survive where there is no resistance, just as fire cannot burn without fuel. Think of the ego as a storyteller that never stops talking. It tells you who you are, what you deserve, what you should fear, and what you must protect. But what if that voice isn't the truth, only a clever impersonator? Alan Watts suggested that the ego is like a character in a play, one we mistake for the actor. And when we cling to that character, fear becomes inevitable, because every story has an ending. and endings terrify the ego. Now, imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. The ego whispers, "Don't look down, don't move, you'll fall." Fear floods your body, not because the cliff is evil, but because the ego interprets it as danger to its fragile identity. Yet, step into the mind of a base jumper, leaping from that same cliff, and the fear transforms into exhilaration. The difference isn't the cliff, it's the surrender. The willingness to dissolve the ego's script and experience reality directly. Philosophers and mystics across cultures have pointed to this same truth in different languages. Lao Tzu spoke of the flowing Tao, Rumi of dissolving into love, Nietzsche of the courage to affirm life even in chaos. Modern psychology now echoes them through mindfulness research, showing that acceptance reduces anxiety more effectively than control. Watts's brilliance was to weave these threads together, making it clear that the end of fear is not found in domination, but in trust. Trust in what, though? In the rhythm of life itself. The same rhythm that carries the seasons, that beats your heart, that moves the galaxies. Fear dies when you remember that you were never separate from that rhythm. You are it. Let's peel this back even further. Fear thrives on the illusion of separation. The ego says, "You are here, and the world is out there. You must defend yourself from it." But science, mysticism, even simple observation reveal a different truth. You are not separate at all. You inhale oxygen from trees. You drink water that has traveled through rivers and clouds for centuries. You eat food that once lived in soil, nourished by stars that exploded long before your birth. Without the world, there is no you. The ego denies this interdependence, and in that denial, fear multiplies. Alan Watts used to say, "You are the universe playing hide and seek with itself." Imagine that. The vast intelligence that spins planets and forms galaxies also takes the shape of you. With your name, your memories, your hopes. And yet most people live like isolated fragments, trembling at the thought of losing what they never truly possessed. Consider the story of a Japanese samurai facing execution. Historical accounts tell us that some warriors, moments before death, would compose short poems, haikus, reflecting serenity rather than terror. Why? Because through surrender, they touched something timeless. They understood that fear belonged to the ego, the puppet, and once the puppet was recognized, the strings lost power. Neuroscience supports this. When monks practice deep meditation, brain scans show reduced activity in the parietal lobe, the region responsible for separating self from other. The less rigid the sense of self, the less grip fear has. In those states, even pain registers differently, perceived not as an enemy, but as a fleeting sensation, part of the river of existence. This doesn't mean surrender is easy. The ego is clever, whispering, "If you let go, you'll lose everything." But here's the paradox. By clinging, you lose more. Relationships suffocate under control. Dreams collapse under the pressure of perfection. Life becomes a battlefield where every moment is a threat. Surrender, on the other hand, opens the possibility of trust, not blind faith, but trust in the same intelligence that beats your heart without your permission, that heals wounds without your commands. Fear ends, not when you conquer it, but when you realize there is nothing to conquer. Think for a moment about control. Every day, people live as if they could force reality to obey their will, controlling schedules, careers, relationships, even the future itself. But life has never signed a contract with you. Control is the ego's favorite illusion, and fear is its inevitable byproduct. Because once you believe you are the master of everything, every unexpected turn becomes a threat, every surprise a disaster. Alan Watts often compared life to music. A symphony isn't meant to be rushed to its final note. Its beauty exists in the unfolding, in every rise and fall of the melody. Yet the ego wants the last chord, without hearing the song. Always impatient, always tense. Fear grows from that impatience. We dread what's coming, because we are too afraid to simply listen to the music of the present. Imagine a sailor at sea. The ego tries to command the waves. Do not rise, do not fall, stay calm. But the ocean does not care. The wise sailor doesn't fight the water. They adjust their sails. Surrender in this sense is skill, not weakness. It's aligning with the flow instead of exhausting yourself against it. And once you understand this, fear becomes less of a monster and more of a signal. A reminder that the ego has once again mistaken itself for the captain of a ship it never truly commanded. Modern psychology calls this cognitive reframing, the ability to reinterpret what the mind labels as danger. A failed job interview is no longer a catastrophe. It's a redirection. A breakup is not the death of love. It's the clearing of space for something new. And beneath each of these shifts lies the same principle Watts pointed to. The moment you stop clinging to how things should be, fear loses its claws. Think of it in your own life. How many nights have you lost to imagined disasters that never came? How many decisions have you avoided because fear whispered in your ear? And yet, here you are, alive, breathing, surviving everything your ego swore would destroy you. Doesn't that tell you something? Let's venture into the very heart of fear, the fear of death. It is the ultimate shadow lurking behind all others. Fear of failure is fear of dying socially. Fear of rejection is fear of dying emotionally. Fear of the unknown is fear of dying without control. The ego trembles because it equates death with annihilation, the end of its story. But Alan Watts reminded us that death is not the enemy of life. It is part of its rhythm, like silence is part of music. Picture a candle flame. The ego sees the flame vanish and cries, "It's gone." But physics tells us the flame hasn't disappeared. It has transformed into heat, into light, into particles carried through the air. So too with us. What we call death may simply be a change of form, a return to the same vast intelligence that gave rise to us in the first place. Surrendering to this truth dismantles fear at its root. In many cultures, rituals exist not to avoid death, but to embrace it. Tibetan monks meditate among charnel grounds, whispering mantras beside corpses, training themselves to meet impermanence with open eyes. Stoic philosophers practiced memento mori, daily reminders of mortality, not to depress themselves, but to liberate themselves from fear's tyranny. And in modern psychology, exposure therapy works on the same principle. By facing what terrifies us, instead of fleeing, the brain learns that fear is not fatal. Think of the moments in your own life when surrender to impermanence brought unexpected peace. Perhaps the end of a relationship that once felt unbearable later revealed a freedom you didn't know you needed. Perhaps a failure you feared became the gateway to growth. Perhaps even the simple act of watching at sunset reminded you that endings are not tragedies, but transitions. The ego resists these lessons, but reality insists upon them. Watts would say that to surrender is to die before you die, to release the ego's grip so thoroughly that when real death arrives, it is no stranger, but an old friend. In that release, fear ceases to control. What remains is life, vivid and unshackled, lived moment by moment without the shadow of dread. There is a curious thing about fear. It shrinks the moment. When you are afraid, your awareness narrows, your breath shortens, your body stiffens. Life collapses into a tunnel where only the threat exists. But surrender does the opposite. It expands the moment. When you stop resisting, suddenly you notice details. The texture of the air, the rhythm of your breath, the subtle hum of existence. Fear is contraction. Surrender is expansion. Think of how animals embody this wisdom naturally. A gazelle runs for its life from a lion, its body flooded with fear. But once the chase is over, if it survives, it shakes, it breathes, and then it grazes again, as if nothing happened. It doesn't live replaying the terror. Humans, however, let the ego keep the fear alive, long after the danger has passed. We rehearse tragedies that never occur. We turn survival into a permanent prison. Surrender breaks that cycle, allowing us to return to the present where life is actually happening. Alan Watts encouraged people to laugh at the ego, to see through its seriousness. He called it cosmic play. The idea that life is not a problem to solve, but a dance to join. Fear cannot dance. It can only freeze. But the moment you surrender, even to your own vulnerability, you rediscover fluidity. You begin to move with life instead of against it. And here lies the ultimate irony. When you let go of fear by surrendering the ego, you don't lose yourself. You find yourself. Not the narrow, anxious Adori your ego insists on, but the deeper self that is vast, timeless, and unafraid. So, what is the end of fear? It is not light nor comfort. It is a confrontation with the truth most people run from. Fear ends when you realize that your ego, this fragile little mask you polish, defend, and worship, is a liar. It tells you that you can control, that you can protect, that you can survive untouched. But reality doesn't care about that illusion. Life devours the ego piece by piece until there is nothing left. And the more you resist, the more it hurts. Surrender is not gentle. It is brutal. It strips you of the false identity you cling to. It drags you into silence where your excuses cannot follow. It is the death of the character you thought you were, and the birth of something far more dangerous, a self that no longer fears. Imagine what you could do if fear lost its grip. How unpredictable you would become, how powerful. Fear controls the masses, but those who dissolve it walk freely through chaos, while others tremble. This is the kind of freedom that terrifies society. The freedom of a mind that can no longer be manipulated by threats, shame, or promises. When fear dies, you become untouchable. You become something the world cannot own. And that is why few dare to face it. So I'll ask you this. Do you really want to end fear? Or will you cling to the ego's lies, safe in your prison, comfortable in your chains? If you're ready to go deeper into these forbidden truths, then this is your moment. Subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and step with me into the shadows where illusions collapse and real power begins.